This episode is a really fascinating episode. I interview Robert Wylie. His story is extremely multifaceted. From an infant, he experienced rheumatoid arthritis and has been living with this his whole life. Part of that, some of the symptoms were chronic fatigue and inflamed joints, which at sometimes and oftentimes was very debilitating, getting in the way of his life.
When I was an infant, whenever the storms would come in, whenever the barometer would change, I would cry uncontrollably.
Because of this and several other factors, he'd experienced a lot of emotional turmoil. He'd had suffered from depression for several years as well. In the process of trying to recover and heal from his physical and emotional pain, he started skating and built a network of friends that he grew very close to. Unfortunately, he lost those two friends through suicide as well.
Basically, they were brothers in every factor except for blood. I'm the only surviving member of that Wild on Wheels team that hasn't taken their own life.
And that further spiraled his depression. He talks about the two abusive relationships that he experienced, where he finally hit rock bottom and had every intention to end his life. And in that very moment, he had an epiphany, decided this was the moment he was going to turn his life around.
She was basically trying her hardest to destroy me emotionally. She was out sleeping with a guy. Well, the second relationship, I was so hungry for affection. She was to the point where, I would be around her and I would always have to be in defense.
And today, he's a self-defense instructor, and he's an author, and he's also a public speaker. And through his public speaking, he talks about things such as self-protection, setting boundaries, empowering others to identify and even stand up against predators. Stay tuned and enjoy the episode. Robert, welcome to Multispective. I'm so excited to have you here.
Well, thanks for having me.
So, Robert, why don't we start off with you just telling our listeners today a little bit about yourself and where are you from? Where do you live? Where were you raised?
Well, I'm from a beautiful area called Rexburg, Idaho. We have some wonderful mountain ranges, all kinds of snow, and our seasons are phenomenal. I was born and raised here. I actually live about 100 yards north of where the house I grew up in.
Oh, wow.
We put up a house to help take care of my mom because she was widowed, and then she went ahead a couple years later and got married and moved away, and she's traveling and enjoying life. So,
Wow, that's amazing. Are you close to your family?
yeah, for the most part, I've got some siblings that are quite a bit older than me that I see here and there, but as far as my parents, we were really close, and then I've got one sibling that's 3 years older than me that we see pretty consistently.
Right. So you do have some sort of family that's still living there in Idaho with you at home or around you, like in your neighborhood, is it?
Just around us. My closest sister is about 10, 15 miles away, so relatively close.
Awesome.
Most of my other families moved away either 400 or 500 miles or more, so they're all around the world.
Right. That's amazing. Have you ever lived outside of the U.S. at any point in your life?
No, I've stayed stateside pretty much my entire life. I have been coast to coast. I spent a few years over in Virginia and Maryland and that area, Quantico and Falls Church area. But I like it over in the West. In the Midwest is a beautiful place for me. Plus, as soon as I get somewhere else, the ice crystals start melting out of my blood, and it gets painful. I have to move back to colder climates, so it works for me.
Yeah. Yeah, your stories, I find your story really fascinating because I guess I've only really ever heard of something like this or, the extent of this on TV. I've never really like known that it is something that really does exist out there. And, I think it'd be really good to like raise it to our listeners as well so they can sort of like see what it feels like to be living with this. Can you tell us a little bit about where it all begins?
Well, my mom first noticing that when I was an infant, whenever the storms would come in, whenever the barometer would change, I would cry uncontrollably. She noticed that I was always in immense amount of pain and would really be unhappy when the weather changed. And so we went through a bunch of tests and discovered that I was diagnosed pretty much in infancy with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. And we struggled for years to try to figure out how to control it between different medications and different supplements and all kinds of garbage that really didn't help much.
How common or rare is this especially for infants, for little kids?
It's not really common at all, especially with the really young kids. And quite often, from what I've understood, once they hit adolescence, a lot of the time you can get out of that, and a lot of the rheumatoid arthritis subsides, so that either it gets really, really bad or it pretty much goes away.
Mm-hmm. Could you tell me, like, or have you read or heard about, like, how, what can cause a person to have it? Is it a genetic thing, or is it related to blood, rheumatoid? How can you just determine that a person has this?
Well, it's just like most other autoimmune disorders or diseases. Unfortunately, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, Lyme's disease, all of those, MS, all of those exhibit in different ways. So there are certain side effects that one person will get and others won't. My side effects that hurt me the most, I have chronic fatigue. So my body just gets so heavy that it's hard to pick it up. And there are some times that it's depressing because you just can't move around very much because it's just so much of a labor. And then my joints, there's a lot of fluid that builds up in the joints, which destroys a lot of the joint, plus it causes a lot of pressure. And most of my life, it was in my knees and my hips. Now that I've gotten older, it's gotten into my shoulders, and I spend quite a bit of time in PT fighting that, because where I teach self-defense full-time, I have to be able to move around with my upper body. I need to be able to make strikes and move around. So it's kind of important to be able to do that. But I don't know for sure, and I've never seen, and from what I've seen, a lot of people can't agree where it comes from. It seems like that we are all unique, and our biology is unique as far as those factors. So one person may be more susceptible to it than another, and it's basically your body attacking itself. And that's the problem with autoimmune diseases, is they can go and they can ebb and flow. So you can have really, really bad days, and they're not visible. Most of the time you can't see that somebody has it unless when you're dealing with the swollen joints, and you get those that have the big heavy knots in the hands, which I never had to. I have always been active enough to work through the fluids, so I've never had to have that problem. And I'm not crippled, thank heaven, even though I'm almost 50. So
yeah. Is that common for people with rheumatoid arthritis to potentially be crippled from it?
Oh yeah. My physical therapist, he was blown away that I haven't had any joints replaced. And he's had several clients that have had rheumatoid arthritis and haven't had it as long as I've had it, that have had almost every joint replaced: their hips, their knees, their elbows, their shoulders, and basically have had to go through and become, the bionic woman or the bionic man to have all the joints replaced. But luckily, I've been active enough and been blessed enough that I've been able to work through and not have to replace those joints yet.
Right. But if those joints were to be replaced, would that prevent this kind of like liquid buildup and the inflammation and the pains and the aches going forward, or would that still continue to persist after?
Oh yeah, it'll stick around even just because you replace the edge of the bone or the procedures that they have to replace those joints. That basically it's the cartilage that houses that joint goes away, and so it erodes away from the bone, and they have to replace that part of the bone. So the body is still viewing those joints as basically it needs to destroy it because it needs to protect it. And the body protects itself by encasing it or housing it. That's why when you get cut, you get it swells up because it's going around. Like if you get
It's kind of just like they're trying to like defend and like fix it and, fix the problem basically. So it causes a bit of swelling around that area while it forms a scab, I guess, right?
Yeah, the scabs or the cysts or those kind of things are just basically the body trying to protect itself from foreign objects.
Right.
And that's what the body does. But when it's misinformed or misguided, it decides to destroy things instead of help things along.
You mentioned earlier about the weather change. Can you explain how does the weather correlate to this situation for you? And is it the same for everyone that's got this?
For the most part, from what I understand, when you have either arthritis or basically rheumatoid arthritis is a more exacerbated version of arthritis. So when you have arthritis, it basically is that fluid in the joints, and when you get old and break things, that it's build up around those bones or those joints. And for some reason, when the barometer changes, it's changing the pressure as the atmospheric pressure. And for some people, if you have a higher pressure, or if you go to a higher elevation, or if you go too low, then they suffer the pain. Me, I'm unique, I guess, that it's only when it's changing. So as that's shifting, it's almost like if you've ever done scuba diving and you've had to clear your ears and you have those sinus areas that have to have the air flow in and out to be able to equalize. It's that same thing with the voids in the joints. And they're trying to push, as the pressure increases, they're trying to push that extra air or fluid out. And as it decreases, it's sucking it back in. So it's moving through. And that's the way I vision it in my mind, as far as why it's causing the pain during the fluctuation. And then when it levels out, then I do a lot better, except for, when I've pushed it too hard. Me and my wife volunteer for search and rescue, and we've been doing that for about 20 years. And when I'm up on an extended search or do a lot of snowshoeing or a lot of the extra physical exertion, I also feel it too. So it's, but usually it only is when the pressure is shifting.
So have you in that case, like, would you say that's one of the big reasons why you've chosen to stay where you are, stay put in the same sort of city or area, because your body's sort of like maybe used to this? What are the weather changes like in Idaho where you're living?
I love this area. I love the view. I love the people. I love the social aspect, pretty much all the aspects of southeast Idaho. And that's why I stay here. I'm sure that there are other climates that are a little more kind to my joints, but I'm sure that professionally I probably would be a lot more busy and a lot more lucrative if I spent a lot more times in a lot more of the more troubled parts of the world. But I like this area, and so that's why I've spent my fair share in larger communities out in Virginia and down south. But I like this area, so that's why I deal with the weather and deal with the pains until I guess when I either die trying or give up
Yeah.
and society changes here. But I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Fair enough. Can we just talk a little bit about like cures or treatments, or at least, ways to manage it? Like, what has that been like for you?
You know, again, like I said before, we're all unique. And so one thing, it's just like when you're thinking about it, we practice medicine. We don't have it mastered. We're practicing it. And not every narcotic and not every tactic or, any time that we want, not any cure is going to fit for everybody. With me, when I went through all of the different supplements and different things that I could take to basically deal with the symptoms and not the core of the problem, it didn't help me. So I started roller skating. And with me, as I kept that fluid movement, and with roller skating, you can use a lot of the muscles.
Excuse me.
Bless you. You can use a lot of those muscles, but it's not as harsh as running or a lot of your other physical exercise. So I was able to work through those joints. They were able to move through. In fact, right before the pandemic was the last time I went skating. I still can do splits. So it still maintained as far as my flexibility, and working the flexibility opens up those joints and keeps that fluid from building up too much, because those joints are maintained. The muscles are stronger still. And so it was my own personal type of PT. There are other things like chondroitin that you can take. But you do have to watch not to treat the symptom only. My understanding and my brain is always focused on the core. When you can focus on, the root of the problem, or focus on the root of how our body works, then you're always so much farther ahead than just taking a painkiller. Because when you take a painkiller, you're not fixing the issues. You're having more damage done because you're not fixing the issues. Your body forgets how to create those endorphins, those natural painkillers. So if you're not supplying it or trying to supply it by more natural ways, or helping the body produce those needed medications itself, then you're just postponing the inevitable instead of actually trying to live your better life.
Yeah. I like that you were able to sort of like practice willpower on something like this, because it's all too easy, especially nowadays with doctors recommending pain medication, to, follow doctor's orders and, assume that the doctor is always going to be right by, the kind of medication that they prescribe. But, we also know that painkillers can be highly addictive and, at the end of the day can cycle back to something way more serious. And again, if with something like rheumatoid arthritis, it's sort of like a lifelong thing. So, you will continue to come back to it if you take, pain meds. It's not like, an injury that eventually can, be cured completely. And it's just a short period of time of medical intake. What were some of the like forms of treatment that you and your mom sort of like explored with you growing up? Did she also like get into like alternative therapy and that kind of stuff too, or yeah?
Well, I got into pressure points for being able to work through the medical benefits, and discovered that like yin and yang, you've got the good and you got the bad. So you can use a pressure point in a good way to help work through and help your body produce or stimulate the body, but you can also use those pressure points to stop an attacker, or you can be able to work those pressure points when they're a weakness as well.
Right.
So I got into pressure points. I found that reflexology works really quite well because when you can understand that your brain is your body is intertwined, that it has mapping, or it has a very fine balance as far as working as an entire organism and communicating between your feet and your hands and your nerves. And when you can understand the neural pathways, the more you can understand it, the more you can address the issues that happen in your body. I wish that the medical professions focused a lot more on that instead of the simple quick fix. One setback that I found as I've worked through, like, the holistic approach, as far as, oils and the right kind of vitamins in the right kind of sequence, because your body needs those building blocks, but it also has to have it in the right organization so that it can assimilate it. And if you can't, then it just passes through your body and it's useless. But I found that as I've worked with that, my metabolism for drugs is a lot quicker too. When I was fourth grade, about 9 years old, my appendix burst, and we went to the doctor because I was sick, and he's like, "Oh, you just got the flu, don't worry about it." Well, my appendix burst, and 5 days later, we got back into the doctor finally, and he said, "We need to get you into surgery right now because your appendix had burst." So they got me into surgery. When they opened me up, they pulled out the exploded appendix and left a lot of the infection inside my body. So I laid there for another 4 or 5 days, maybe even 7, and my right leg swole almost to twice its size. I was full of infection. A young doctor and a young nurse put their jobs on the line to go above the head doctor's head, above his head, and they sent me to Primary Children's Hospital in Salt Lake City. They flew me down there, had a team ready because they knew that I had gangrene. Due to miracles from God, the gangrene was stopped where it was, but they had to deal with the gangrene. They had to leave me open. They basically cut me open about 1.5 feet from throughout my abdomen and left me open for about 1.5 months, and would replace packing so that they could get the infection out. Because that gangrene, if you're familiar with it, is nasty stuff. I mean, it'll chew up and spit out and kill you in a very short time. But I had the gangrene and I had the infection that they took quite a while to clean out. When they finally sewed me up, I have about 1 inch of dermis that never grew back, and the nerves are still firing funky, so I don't have any filling in that inch of that 1.5 foot length of scar. And they put me on a lot of really heavy morphine and a lot of heavy narcotics, and they were really worried about me becoming addicted because I was under that really high dose for a good 2 to 3 months. And the only way I can attest it is I was being watched over by the man upstairs, and that because of the things that I'd done with the rheumatoid arthritis and all of that, that I metabolized drugs really quite quickly, and so it didn't hold on to me like so many other people that have suffered from addiction. So I was truly blessed there that I didn't have to worry about, or you didn't have to go through the withdrawals that a lot of people have had to when they've been under
Right.
that high doses.
Right. That is so scary. The fact that it went undetected for 5 days. I'm just wondering, like, what are the chances of someone making it through with a bursted appendix for 5 days? Is it? I mean, I would assume it's quite serious.
Oh yeah, it's a major infection throughout the body. Your appendix is one of those organs that is your filters. So it cleans out all the crap that's in your
Right.
system. So when it doesn't operate and it starts getting compacted and then it starts swelling because it gets infected inside and it bursts. I mean, people have died throughout, the millennia because of appendix and, the stomach pain, and then the infection goes through. It's just like having an abscess or a cyst and having it burst and getting to your bloodstream. You can die in a very short period of time, or like with me, that's why I always say they practice medicine. They don't they don't have it down pat because they're
Yeah.
practicing it. They don't quite fully understand how the body works, and we're all unique. So um, I'm just blessed that I probably had a more important purpose to be on this earth, and it didn't get into my bloodstream. And I
Right.
was also, it was caught in time after the initial uh, the
Right.
infection was disturbed from pulling that encasing out, and
Right.
that's when the uh, gangrene set in, was because that was
Mm.
disturbed.
Right. Have you, like, in your life, after that surgery or before it, ever been under the knife for rheumatoid, like for the rheumatoid arthritis? Has there ever been a time where, doctors have performed some kind of surgery for this or tried to treat it through surgery?
There's really not any surgeries that I know of that you can treat that. So
So it's
I've
just about.
never been under the knife for that, and I've never found any treatments that they actually do any kind of internal medicine to try to
Right.
modify it some part of the body to stop that from attacking.
Right. What was that like for you, like emotionally, mentally, like spiritually? How did you manage to get through the hardest, the toughest times, the most painful moments, or when you had this chronic fatigue? What did you do to sort of like keep yourself, motivated, driven?
I seriously asked that question to myself a few years ago, because I had faced all of that pain throughout my life. The chronic fatigue is just horrible because it's like you're under a weight. If you've ever had those dreams where you try to run but it's slow motion, well, that's part of life when your body is so heavy and that's the only way I can describe it, is your body's really heavy. To face that, I started the skating and discovered that I was pretty good at it. So I had two friends that we pulled in, and we started traveling around performing, and we were called Wild on Wheels. Wow. And we would do exhibition skating, and we do all kinds of tricks, and in the course of life, facing my own demons and the depression that I've faced in my life, my friends also faced it, and I'm just do a long story short. I'm the only surviving member of that Wild on Wheels team that hasn't taken their own life. And after the the pain of losing brothers, basically that they were brothers in every factor except for blood. And looking back at that a few years ago, I asked that question as far as how how am I turning out and not wanting to kill myself anymore? And I have been able to limit the self-harming thoughts and face the pain. And even with the continued problems where the rheumatoid arthritis has spread into my back and into my arms. I started looking back, and I like to liken it like if you've ever seen the fire triangle. There's the three factors that take to create a fire and cause it to burn and to burn hotter. So in those three factors, you've got heat, oxygen, and fuel. And without those three in moderation, in even components, then you aren't going to get a flame, and that flame's not going to maintain, and it's not going to grow. Well, when I look at that, the three factors in my fire triangle are, in heat is my relationship with God. In air is my attention to breathing, to take a breath when life gets overwhelmed, and working on my own physical and mental health. And as I work through that I can breathe and work on making it easier for me to breathe, and as I've faced, maintained my physical health, and then also spent the time on my mental wellness and my addressing my self-awareness. And then the third one is a lot of people overlook, but is truly important, is the fuel. And the fuel is service with gratitude. And when you have service and you're grateful for what you have, when you get out of your own head and you look at the needs of others, and you spend the time to be able to help them, and it increases your gratitude. And when you have gratitude, you're focusing a lot more on what you have and not what you want or what you don't have. And when you do that three balance and you work it as an even triangle, then it helps give you a solid foundation to stand on. And when you're on a solid foundation to stand on, you're not as easily knocked over, and you have a purpose, and you have an insight, and you have a will and a capability because of those three items. And so when I found that I'm getting a little off balance, then I start evaluating, and I'm honest with myself as far as those three aspects. Because if you focus too much on one of those aspects, you get unbalanced. If you focus on God too much and only solely on your relationship with God, then you start beating yourself up because you're not perfect, because you're falling short from, the things that you should be doing, the checklist, If you focus too much on your physical health and your mental health, then you become self-centered, you become focused on yourself, and you don't see what you truly have because you're too busy trying to control things that you can't control on some parts of your health. And then on service, if you spend too much time on that, then you run out of fuel, you run out of being able to help others because you don't have anything else to give, and you're just hollow because you're just going through the motions. And so when you go through those three aspects, that's what I found, that I look back and I'm like, I feel pain when I think of my friends. And I've since then, and during that time frame of losing those two friends, I've had way too many other friends that have lost the battle with their own demons. But as I look back, that's what's given me strength, and that's why I do what I do. That's why I speak, and that's why I travel around and try to help others, is because I found something that works for me, and I want other people to be able to enjoy that.
I like that. The two friends of yours that decided to leave this world, were they also experiencing some sort of physical health problems, or was it for other reasons?
Well, one of them, he had a lot of problems with narcotics, and so the drugs of between alcohol and other drugs have really caused stress on his body and stress on himself. And he started focusing on the life that other people had and what he didn't have. And he couldn't handle it anymore. The other one went through some decisions that he shouldn't. We all make mistakes, and he thought that those mistakes were so great that he wasn't going to be able to see his kids ever again. And he started looking at things that were, really not going to be eternal, but he couldn't see past the trials that he was facing immediately. So both of those, I mean, they really didn't have the health issues that I have, but they had, some of them had mental issues. And I mean, we all face some mental health issues in the world that we live in today. I can't think of anybody that hasn't faced something that, and we all have our own demons. And years ago, I was told by a gentleman that if you treat everybody like they're on their last leg and they're so far underwater that they're trying to keep their head above water, then you're going to be right probably 90% of the time. And the more I look at it, the more, I wish everybody around me treated me like I was just this close from losing it, because we would be in a better world. And I think there's more truth to what he said than he really probably realized.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think to an extent, we just start to be a little bit more compassionate in our language, because, at the end of the day, you cannot see the pain and the suffering the individual's going just on their face. It's all of it is happening for every individual at a different place and a different level. I guess for you, it must have been maybe at that point of losing your friends, realizing that there was so much, the pain that they were experiencing maybe was so much deeper than you had known. And maybe you knew about what was actually going on in their lives, but not maybe to the extent of they are almost at their wits' end at this point. Do you agree with that? With your friends, were you in the know of what was going on in their lives at the time? Did you know that they were, experiencing such pain in that moment? Or were they sort of quite good at sort of just putting that aside when the three of you would meet to skate?
Oh, I could tell something was off. We had gotten to the point when both of them left this world. We had not been skating professionally for quite a while. One was in Alaska. I had gone off to Virginia for several years and then came back. So we would get together and spend time. But the one friend of mine, I saw him on a pretty regular basis, and he was able to help me through an abusive relationship. And I'm so glad that I knew he was going through some issues. And the last time I saw him, I was able to tell him I loved him and let him know that, remind him that he was my brother from another mother. My other friend, I knew that he was unhappy. I didn't realize to that extent, and he was, 1,000, 1,500 miles away. So I could talk to him on the phone and knew that he wasn't happy, but I thought that he was working through it, and he was planning on moving down away from Alaska. But I mean, there's only so much that another human being can do, and when you're in that state, I've been to that point where I was just knocking on death's door. I was to the point in a really abusive relationship that I got to the point where I had taken my shotgun, gone into the bedroom, and there was kind of a suite, so I went into the bathroom part of that bathroom area and was making plans, had the shotgun all ready to go, and a voice in my head said, "You're not going to let that bitch win." And that's when the switch clicked in my brain, and I got a slap in the face and said, "Hey, whoa, wait a minute here. Wake up. There's more to life than what you're dealing with right now." So it's only by the grace of God that I'm not in the ground from a shotgun in the mouth. So I know that when you're in that state, you're not in the right state of mind, and your view is messed up. You can't see straight. You can't see out of that fog or that overwhelming depression,
Right.
that darkness.
Would you say that the depression for you started, or you started experiencing that, looking back in hindsight, did that happen sort of like before this relationship started? Was it, due to the rheumatoid arthritis, or did it sort of really kick in when you got into this abusive relationship?
I've fought with it all my life. My dad had depression and was bipolar. His dad, during the Great Depression, lost his farm and lost his mind. So he went homeless while my dad was a young man. And so I know that there are those chemical imbalances in my family, which are hereditary. So you add that in, that's a perfect cocktail to blow up in your face. So between the pain, I can deal with it, but the chronic fatigue and the limiting feel, that just was fuel on the fire with the imbalance and facing that. So I was depressed, and that's probably why I got into that relationship, because I knew full well that I shouldn't been in that relationship. I knew full well when I said I do that I shouldn't be saying I do. And I knew that it was abusive, but I felt like I couldn't have anything better. And then I went from that abusive relationship to another one because I wasn't right with myself. And then when I finally got honest with myself and said, "Hey, wake up," and went through, and I think started when I started utilizing that triangle that I talked about earlier. My second ex was even worse than my first because she was physically abusive and emotionally abusive. And so I'm a firm supporter for those that, you just because you're a guy doesn't mean that, and I like to say that I'm pretty capable of handling myself. I mean, for crying out loud, I teach self-defense for a living full time. So I should be able to take care of myself, but in a relationship that's abusive, physically abusive, it's a different animal, and you have to be in your right headspace. After I divorced her, she moved out with her boyfriend, and I finally was able to break free. I was able to start that triangle working, and I didn't realize just how effective it was until it worked through. And then now I'm been married to my sweetheart for since 2001. She's my best friend and my partner in both the business and in everything I do. So she is right to my side in search and rescue and all of our endeavors. So
That's amazing.
when you get in the right headspace and you're honest with yourself, things fall in place. So I think it was more that my depression caused that relationship than my relationship caused the depression.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah. Can you walk me through that first relationship? How was it emotionally? You said the first one was emotionally and the second one was physically and emotionally. Can you just tell us a little bit of backstory about these two relationships and what was that like? And, how also that tied in with your, physical situation as well with the rheumatoid.
Well, to give you an idea, an experience sums it up perfectly. For her birthday, my first ex-wife, for her birthday, her and her sister and me went to a restaurant for her birthday to celebrate it. And she was talking about all of the wild things that she did as she was growing up and just how extremely wild she was. And she said turned to me and she says, if I were to do it again, I would have been worse, been a lot worse. And her idea was it wasn't fun unless it was against the rules. And so she focused really hard on getting, wooing me to. So she had a beautiful little girl that was only about 9 months old when I first met her, and she was just a cutie. I mean, she was so adorable, and I think that's why I stayed with her as long as I did, is because that, and I felt like I didn't deserve any better. But she was basically trying her hardest to destroy me emotionally as much as she possibly could, because it wasn't fun unless she was breaking the rules. So she would spend as much time as possible to go out and buy things under my name, or cheat with guys that were married, and have me stay home and take care of her daughter. And then she would basically try to tell me that it was my fault. Probably the typical narcissist that you see or hear about in society now. It wasn't fun unless she was breaking laws or breaking rules. The stress happened so bad that I used to wear the leather jacket and the big heavy combat boots and all the crap in the pockets. And even with all of that gear on, I was under 90 pounds when within a month before I divorced her. And I divorced her on our first anniversary. So it was while she was out sleeping with a guy, which I did some work for a private investigator. And so I would do some work with him. And since I was busy at the house taking care of the daughter, then I had him do some video and some reconnaissance, and I'd already tapped the phone. So she was on the phone making arrangements the night before. And what tipped me off was her sister called and said, "Hey, this guy wants to sleep with you. He really would like to meet up and hook up." And she's like, well, she was trying to figure out how to say, not speak about what her sister was trying to do, but because I was sitting right next to her. So she goes, well, why did you have to go and go to the bar with so-and-so? And I'm like looking at her like, you really think I'm that stupid that so-and-so? I mean, why didn't you just come up with a name, for crying out loud? But so I went back and listened to the tapped phone line and heard the whole thing and went, okay, called my buddy and said, okay, I need you to follow her and videotape this so I have proof so I can divorce her. So as she was sleeping with him, I was with his kids in the house. I was moving out with just the clothes that I had, and then she called and she wanted to spend the night with him, but she's like, well, I need to take care of some other things here in Idle Falls. So, and I said, no, you need to quit what you're doing and come home. And so she came home, and I basically gave her a daughter and walked out the door and said, okay, and filed for divorce and walked away. So she was extremely manipulative, and she knew full well that I thought that I couldn't do any better. And she thought she had me by the short hairs because she had convinced me to get married and
Right. It's weird though. Like, I find it so weird how, like, I don't know, like predators almost can like smell like a certain kind of through maybe the demeanor of an individual. They can smell vulnerability, or not vulnerability, I would say, like maybe weakness to an extent, right? They can smell and sense when an individual is not fully maybe secure with themselves, and they, take that as an opportunity to like prey on them, as opposed to, like help uplift them. And this is sort of where that, where that sort of like very isolating feeling comes in, because, you're like the person who's supposed to be my family, my home, my go-to, my safe space it's like me against that person, me against technically what is supposed to be my comfort place. And I can imagine that being really, really hard. Like it sort of like slowly breaks down on your self-esteem and confidence. And the next thing you know, you're left with this big gaping hole. Like, what have I gotten myself into? Who am I? And how do I find it in myself to rebuild from such trauma? And so I sort of understand when you say why, that led to sort of the next kind of toxic relationship in a sense, because you had come out of such trauma and you were still in the throes of it, I guess, and went into the next relationship where the next person again maybe sensed that's like weakness within you, and instead of it being again them trying to help lift you up, it was what can I get out of this situation?
Yeah, you're so hungry for, well, the second relationship, I was so hungry for affection. I was so hungry because I had been isolated for over a year. So I needed that touch. I needed that. I mean, we're pack animals. We need society. And even those that are hermits still, they can claim all they want, but they still need that contact. They still have either pets or they still have some sort of contact to be able to feed that emotion. But
Right.
predators use a lot of that emotional manipulation because our guts will tell us, oh, that's not right. But when you don't have a strong foundation, like when I was talking about that triangle, then if you don't know what you believe, if you're referring to other people to tell you what you believe or what your church teaches or what your organization believes or whatever, if you don't know for sure what you believe, then it's too easy for manipulators to come in. Those predators will identify you as vulnerable. And one fact that when you are in a state of transition, whether it's mentally, physically, or spiritually, you are always most vulnerable in that state of transition. Just as when you're walking from the store to your car in a parking lot, that's when the predators go for you. When a deer is walking through the forest and going along on that trail, that's when they're most vulnerable for the wolves or for the mountain lions. When you don't know where you stand, which that's why so many adolescents and youth are so easily and so often targeted as prey, is because adolescence is a solid state of transition. I mean, you're
Right.
transforming with your hormones and your body's developing, and you're going through all these different things that you don't even know which side's up. So they know
Right.
it's an easy target. And then when you're dealing with somebody that doesn't know what they believe, or with me, I didn't know what my personal worth was. I didn't have that relationship with God that I needed to have. So I didn't know who I was, my value. And so I was willing to sacrifice that because I didn't feel the value. And yeah, like you were saying, predators can smell that. When you're a predator, you kick in, you have certain triggers that kick your prey. And so just like when you're dealing with the oasis in the middle of the desert, you're always going to have predators in the water because predators will always be where the prey are.
Right, exactly. So your second relationship, in what way was that abusive? Would you say it's pretty similar to the first one in a sense, or quite different?
She came from a very dominative, her mom dominated her dad all the way through. So she was very, I guess, manipulative to always be the victim or always be the, she would antagonize and cause problems. And perfect example of her is for a while when I was married to her, I'd work rotating shifts. So I would work mornings for 4 days and then get 2 days or 3 days off. And then I work afternoons into the evening for 2 or 3 days and then 2 or 3 days off, and then graveyards till the wee hours of the morning. Well, those graveyards, I try to sleep during the day, and I would have to lock the door because she would come in and she would wait till I would get sound asleep and then come in and jump on me and start punching me or trying to hit me in the groin or trying to twist my fingers or taking a blunt instrument to me. I mean, she was to the point where, I would be around her and I would always have to be in defense and always be in a defensive position because I never knew when she'd try to swing around and hit me in the
Right.
painful points or
Right.
trying to hit me in the throat, or most of the time it was in the lower extremities that she would try,
Right.
or while I was asleep she would try to attack me and claw me. And so she was manipulative, and she wasn't near as dangerous as my first one as far as emotionally. And I think probably because of that experience I had with the shotgun and the snap in my brain saying, no, I'm not going to let her beat me. I was able to get a little more. I was still starved for affection, but I was able to get a little bit more ground under me as far as being able to deal with that emotional attacks. But the physical attacks, I you don't hit a girl, you don't hit women. So to try to defend myself without striking back, and then I wasn't gonna get divorced again because then I was going to be a failure for the rest of my life. And you start putting limits and changing things to the eternal instead of the immediate future. So I was like, if I get divorced, I'm never going to be able to maintain a relationship because I'll just cut and run every time. So I kept with her way too long until she finally left me to move in with her boyfriend, and we got divorced. But that was one of the best things that happened to me with her, is that she actually found somebody else to treat. And
Right.
the funny thing is, she couldn't let go even after being married for 10 years to my sweetheart. For some reason, my mom thought it was a good idea to give my cell phone number to her when she called. So she called, and she was started in the guise that she was going to apologize for, how we left things. And she was really quite dirty in the divorce. She filed the divorce papers and then told the judge that I never responded. So she wanted all of the stuff and have me pay all the bills. And she told the judge, well, my stipulations win because he never responded in time. And my lawyer was able to go through and say, no, this is the certified mail. This is where he signed for it. This is where he responded. And then the judge luckily knew her because he was in her immediate area and he knew her family. So he called her out on, living with her boyfriend and all the stuff that she pulled before I found out some things about her that I never knew about until after we got divorced, because he knew some of the crap that she had pulled. But she had called and said, I wanted to apologize for how it ended. And then it quickly turned from that to, well, I hope I'm not upsetting your wife about this. And she had friended me on Facebook, and so she was seeing some of the struggles that we've had because we haven't been able to have kids. And so she was building ammunition. So when she talked to me, she says, well, I'm glad that you weren't able to have little Robbies running around. And then she basically let me know that she was mad that I moved on after she left. And I said, I feel bad for you because, she tried every aspect of, the vehicle that she had. She'd been able to, get a nicer vehicle. She got married. I feel sorry for her husband because she's so focused on me still after, over 10 years. And, my wonderful sweetheart was like, I got him. So you lost
Yeah.
that. So I'm not upset at all. And it kind of backfired on her, but it did show me, it made me feel bad that she was so still so empty that she grabbed a hold of that, trying to keep a hold of me as her prey, and I've broken loose and gotten solidified, and the world, it's amazing the help of having a good, trusted relationship. I mean, the power that you can receive from having a truly trusted friend that you are in a fully committed relationship is above anything that I've ever experienced in my life.
Yeah.
And so even all the pains I've suffered, there's nothing that compares to the happiness and joy you can have from a solid relationship with somebody you trust, and that you can, they can trust you completely too.
Right. I guess in probably both the relationships that you were in, the first one being more emotionally abusive, you probably had to practice or like learn to figure out how to establish clear boundaries so that you could be respected and so that no one else would step over you emotionally. And then with your second relationship comes the physical boundaries. Like, you're not going to come in my physical vicinity if it's not accepted or consented. So how do you continue to, or what are the steps that you take to establish those boundaries? Do you find that you've had to say no in a different way, or, talk to me about boundaries for you.
Well, it automatically roots down to, I start every class with 3 principles. The very first one that I start every class with, even the advanced classes, is you are worth fighting for. You are worth defending. In fact, I have bandanas that have that printed on it with our logo that says, you are worth fighting for, you are worth defending. And you have to ultimately understand your own personal worth, because it all roots in those boundaries, all roots into your worth. And when you can understand your worth, then it's easier for you to speak up and say, no, back off, give me my space. I deserve this because I'm worth more than that. I am worth defending. I am worth fighting for. And the second one is denial will hurt you faster than any attacker. And the third one is the body will never go where the mind has never been. And ultimately, I think the best way to understand boundaries and not overstepping your boundaries against others, but also defending your own well-being, is when you understand your worth. And when you have that relationship with, a loving creator that created you and he created me. And when we have that relationship with God, we want the well-being of others, but not to the sacrifice of, detriment to me. I want you to be happy. I want you to be healthy, but I'm not going to let you attack me. I'm not going to let you take away my life. I'm not going to let you take away my mental health, my physical health, or any of that. And that's where you get that foundation, is knowing your worth. And when you understand your worth, then it makes it a lot easier to say, no, back off. And then when you understand other people's worth, then it's a lot easier to not be the predator that's saying, well, I deserve it, but you don't because you're less of a person than me. And when you can understand that eternal value of every human being, then it's a lot easier to have those boundaries and not overstep them.
Yeah, I really, really, really like that. I think that's really well said. Because sometimes, especially when it comes to things like boundaries, there are predators out there who take very, very small, subtle steps into pushing that boundary. And you as an individual sometimes may not even notice or realize. It's very different in a physical sense when someone sort of like attacks you physically. But when it comes to things like emotionally, it can be really hard to detect that a person is overstepping a boundary, because sometimes it's just so subtle and so mild that you're like, I guess it's okay. I guess it's acceptable. And then next thing you realize, it's being pushed further and further and further. and somewhere down the line you have not realized at what point has that been so far crossed, and how to go back to, redrawing that again, right?
Yeah, we teach a class on predator identification where we teach how to identify predators that would manipulate for sexual abuse and fraud and how to counteract them. And one of their major tools that they use is breaking boundaries and borders. So just simple things like that really subtle touch, reaching out and touching somebody on how they react by touching them on the shoulder or sticking your fingers in the hair or slipping behind them and brushing them. It's what's called an interview. So they interview you by watching how you react by their touch, by certain words. And it works the same way with predators that are, like I said before, they're where the prey are. So they unfortunately are in churches. They're in those type of groups. If you have a dating app or dating site, especially if they're a religious dating site, they really like those. And that's why the second thing that I always bring up in my classes is denial will hurt you faster than any attacker, is because when we refuse to see that evil exists, and predators use camouflage, and that's how they blend in, whether it's the snake that's going through the grass or that blends into the tree before he strikes, or whether it's the lion or those predators that just blend in. And the predators that we fear the most, like snakes and spiders, the reason why we do fear them so much is because of how subtle they are, because you don't know for sure if they're there. And when you do see them, you're like, oh crap, oh boy.
Right.
And when you're dealing with emotional predators, then they're even more subtle because they're trying to win you over. They're using your emotion. They're using your instability. And that's why they focus so much on kids that don't have fathers in the home. That's why they focus so much because the mom is so worn ragged that she needs the help. She needs support. And so when she's trying to pay the bills and take care of the kids and take care of everything else, especially when they're in like a church congregation, she's so focused on so many things that she's overwhelmed. And the predator can come in, and it's not just guys, it can be women too, who will move in, and then they are the savior. They provide financial help, or they provide help to watch the kids, or they start showing a lot more attention that's needed. And I'm not saying just because somebody pays more attention means that you need to throat punch them or
Right.
call the cops or shoot them. I'm meaning that as you watch those tells, there are kind-hearted people that are going to help, and then there are those that are going to be conditioning you. And as you trust your gut, because your gut's going to tell you those things, and when you're truly honest with yourself and you're not listening to just your emotions or your desperation, then, when you're looking at kids that are really easily persuaded, are those that don't feel like they have attention. That's why one of the most powerful tools that we have as parents is to communicate with your kids that you love them. I've got a bumper sticker that says, tell your kids that you love them often and teach them how to identify a threat and how to deal with a threat. When you communicate with your kids and tell them that you love them, because so often we think, oh, well, they can just read our minds. They can see our actions. Actions may speak louder than words, but they're not understood as easily as words. So you have to have both. You have to be able to tell your kids you love them and communicate with them. And as you communicate with them, then it's harder for predators to get in between, because once they push those boundaries and those borders, then they separate. If you'll look at any time a predator in nature, they'll go after the weaker, and then they'll separate them from the herd so that they can take them out without mama attacking or the herd coming in and defending that vulnerable member of their group.
Yeah, I really like that. So One last question, actually, I wanted to ask. Since this is sort of like relevant to sort of what you're doing as well with the self-defense, and I guess, you've talked quite a little bit about that. I guess you don't only teach physical self-defense, but also like, emotional and all kinds of self-defense, right? Even just detecting it and being able to be aware of it in your surroundings. For our listeners, what do you think like individuals need to look out for? What are the signs? What are the telltale signs that someone's around you could be a potential predator, or their intentions are not great, especially at the very early stages when they're trying to lure you in? You mentioned following your gut. But for those, especially younger kids, that maybe don't quite understand that concept yet, what do you think a parent could teach their kids to look out for? What do you think an individual that's getting into a relationship could look out for, so that they can better protect themselves and avoid a situation?
Well, where all of our brains are hardwired for self-preservation, where we all have that innate wanting to survive, we can read other people as well. So when you trust your gut, you're going to have automatic replies and responses. Now, society that we live in now deprograms us, and I spend more time in my classes trying to take away that deprogramming them, because we're taught that it's not polite to speak up and say no. It's not polite to poke somebody in the eye. It's not polite to bite or punch or whatever. But we constantly get told that, you need to go hug Uncle Joe, or, say goodbye and give all the people that have visited us a kiss, or you push those boundaries. Now, we have to understand that kids they learn the programming to say it's impolite to do those things. Kids and animals trust their gut already. So if you watch kids and how they react to people, and you take your dog and you see how your dog reacts to people, the dog is reading those body, the biological tells. The dog is reading when the heart rate's raising up, and your body will read that too. That's why I focus so much on the gut. When you identify that something's not right, they're breaking those social rules, something is just off, those are the red flags that you really need to watch. You also need to watch how other people react to those people that you're working on the relationship. Watch how they react to them and how the interactions happen, because they know if you're going to get a lot of conflict with your buddies or with your friends or your girlfriends, then you better need to pay attention on that relationship, because if they're going to the extremes and they're like, the common phrase is love bombing. When you have a narcissist that comes in and he shows you an inordinate amount of affection and attention, and he just goes over the top, he's breaking the social rules. He's breaking those things, and you should go, hey, what's off with this? One exercise that we find that's really fun is when you're watching TV or movies, is you identify the bad guy before the music starts. When you think about that,
interesting. Yeah.
You always have those tells. And now, even in the cartoons, when you think of the cartoons of the bad guy that's sleeping behind the tree, what does he do? He slips behind the tree, comes out, and he looks both ways. He tiptoes. I mean, they exaggerate all of those, hiding and being really, paying attention to their surroundings and all of those things. Well, those same tells in the shows and stuff, like the guy in Hawaii with the big heavy overcoat, and he's looking around a lot, and he's got his hand in his coat. Those tells, your subconscious is automatically catching those, and they're going through and going, oh, okay, that's a sign of a threat. That's not right. Or they're acting nervous, or they're going to the extremes one way or another. So your gut gets uneven. The hair on the back of your neck stands up. You get goosebumps. You get the butterflies in your stomach. All of those are your body's going, whoa, wait a minute here. I need to get ready to fight. And when you start noticing that or seeing those things are off, then you need to take a breath, get a balance, and be able to take a space, because space is your friend, and be able to think, be honest with yourself, and evaluate what's going on around you. When you're dealing with kids, who's trying to get close to your kids? Now, kids, the only thing as far as training your kids is keeping them so that they trust their gut, and also keep them, like I said before, that they know their value, they know that you love them, and that you are going to be honest with them. So don't lie to your kids. Even the simple little stuff. Now, there are things that are too much for kids to handle, but we have an exercise when we teach, what would I do? And you work through different scenarios. The most important thing of that scenario, after you work through what you're going to do, is you always work to a positive outcome. And when you have that positive outcome, not only are you telling your kids that they can do hard things, and that you're trusting them, and when you talk to them like, you talk to your friends, talk to them like those that can understand. And when you treat them like they're intellectual, or like they can understand your communication, they'll get to that point where they know, they react to the way that you treat them. So if you treat them like they're subhumans, and that you can lie to them and disregard things, then you're going to show that their value is less than what their value really is. Really, with kids, you don't have to teach them a lot of, see that guy and do that ninja punch and do all that. When they get old enough that they aren't going to hurt their siblings and hurt their classmates, then you can teach them effective targets and strikes. But when you're dealing with them, keep that programming that society does out of them, so that they're willing to say no and have that border and that boundary, and be willing to speak up and say, no, give me my space. You are treating me below what my value is. And then you're going to raise human beings that not only are going to treat their fellow human beings with value, but you're also going to keep them immune from those manipulative predators that are trying to feed off of that instability and that lack of a base. So that's ultimately with your kids. Be honest with them, tell them you love them, treat them, show them that you love them, and then watch everybody around them. And when they start trying to separate your kid, or they try to show a little more too much attention to your kid, or those kind of things, then hey, step up and say, hey, in my house, we don't touch our kids like that. We don't touch my kids like that. Mm-hmm. And when you tell a predator, say, hey, I know that it's just, no big harm that you reached up and you brushed your hand along the side of her face, or that you put your hand on her shoulder, but you don't touch my kid unless they want you to touch them. And you enforce that boundary too, then those predators know, hey, mama's watching out or dad's watching out. They care about their kid, and they're communicating, and their kid knows the worth. And predators don't want to work for something. They want something for nothing. They're only afraid of being hurt, caged, or killed. And if they get caught and get outed, then they're going to get hurt or caged or killed. So they don't want to mess with that. So it's not worth it. So they'll move on to the next prey. And that's the best way to give your children the immunity against predators, is by giving them that foundation and then watching them and protecting them.
I love that. I think that is so like crucial, because I think, yes, we're often taught as parents to teach kids stranger danger, those kind of things, which is obviously, it's good, it's useful to have. But I think, at the end of the day, if the kid doesn't have a sense of self-respect, and they don't have a sense of self-confidence, and they don't listen to their own voice and trust their own voice because they're always being silenced, then no matter how much stranger danger is being taught to them, they will never be able to sort of like achieve that right from their gut, right? They won't be able to hear their gut voices because they don't believe in themselves. So that gut voice gets silenced in the process too. So I think
Now, the majority of those that are abused, the majority of kids under 16 that are abused, I did a training a while back with Baz Basil, which he does for sex trafficked kids, and trains people to be able to rescue them and watch for the tells. But the majority of kids are abused by those that they know, either a family member, by a trusted family friend, or a close trusted neighbor. So the stranger danger, granted we have those stranger abductions, but the majority of your abuse and a lot of your fraud and manipulation are those that you're supposed to trust. That's why the second thing I was focused on is denial will hurt you faster than any attacker, because when you're thinking that you're safe and you drop all the protections, all those policies and procedures that you've established, then that's when you're treading into denial, and that's when you open your kids up to being hurt, because you're like, well, I know it felt off, but they're so-and-so. I mean, look at BTK Killer. He was chairman of several boards in his church. He was active, extremely active in his church for over 40 years while he was killing and murdering people and torturing them. You look at the serial killers throughout, there's so many of them that they're like, oh, I can't believe that they were the ones that were killing all these people, because they were influential in the community. They were in our church. And I constantly say, I don't care if you're a pastor, bishop, priest, I don't care who you are, if you're the mayor or if you're my oldest buddy, if you're showing me by your actions that there's something not right, that you're indicating by those, I don't care who you are, it's by your actions that whether you're a threat to my kids, and I don't care who you are, I'm going to protect my loved ones, and I'm going to protect myself. So if I have to make that separation, then I'm going to, and I'm going to call you on your crap.
Right. I love that. Robert, thank you so much for today. I feel like there's so much we can take away from this. And I feel like there's, listeners could benefit so much, be it parents or be it individuals, looking into their own sort of life and relationships as well as to the ways that they can protect themselves better. So really, really interesting perspective here. I really, really appreciate you being here with me.
Well, I really have enjoyed this conversation we've had. I'm so thankful that we were able to meet up and be able to do this. This has been fabulous, and I've really enjoyed it.
If you enjoyed the episode and would like to help support the show, please follow and subscribe. You can rate and review your feedback on any of our platforms listed in the description. I'd like to recognize our guests who are vulnerable and open to share their life experiences with us. Thank you for showing us we're human. Also, a thank you to our team who worked so hard behind the scenes to make it happen.
Chris Trzcinski, Stephan Menzel.
The show would be nothing without you. I'm Jennica, host and writer of the show, and you're listening to Multispective.